problem, just like depression or anything else. But it's my problem, and it's my job to fix it, and not project it on my friends and family and everything else. They're supportive to me about it, but I'm the only one that could do something about it. And it took a lot of, took me a long time to get there and realize that I'm the one that has to fix this. You know, family would ask why I would do certain things, like something super simple. Time to go out to eat, right? Going to a restaurant. Where do you want to go? I don't care. And I didn't want to make a decision on that because my life, I function extremely well in high stress situations. At work, I do great at it. The second I'm away from that, I don't want to make a decision. I don't want the conflict. I don't want anything like that. I just want to shut down. And it's really hard to keep myself from going into that. But as I started going to counseling, started seeing therapists, I learned some healthier coping mechanisms, exercise, proper diet, things like that, which kind of gave me the extra strength I needed to really address the problems I had. And one of the best things that helped me was actually talking about the experiences and helping other people that are also fighting the same problem. Me helping them talk through their problems. I don't know how many times I'd be sitting down with somebody, helping them through a realization, and at the same time realizing I've got the exact same thing going on. And so one of the healthiest things I found and the best coping mechanisms I found to help me deal with this is getting out and talking to other people suffering from it, getting them to realize it's okay that this is bothering you, but let's figure out why and moved past it. One of the things that, I don't know if you say bothers me or hurts me whenever I'm talking to someone that's suffering from PTSD, and I hear it all the time, like, well, you know, mine's not like yours. Mine's just from domestic violence. It's not from combat. It doesn't matter. It's just as valid either way. I mean, the PTSD that I received or that I accumulated from years of combat is no different than someone who, you know, you can get PTSD from a car wreck, a traumatic childhood, a bad relationship, witnessing something that just strikes you wrong. And the difference is whenever we go through from that post-traumatic stress to the point where we take it to a disorder to where now I'm not processing this emotion, I'm not healing from it, and it actually turns into disorder. It actually changes the way I react to things. Literally changes the brain chemistry that we have. And it makes it so much harder to go back and readdress those issues because it compiles, you know, it builds up.
I mean, it's from what you're talking about. I mean, that's from one extreme to another extreme. I mean, just basically having to go to a restaurant and having your back against the wall because you're wanting to have protection and see everything around you. But what exactly, I know you're not a doctor, what exactly is the clerical view of what PTSD is? From your experience, what you've been told?
From my experience, from what I've been told, for me, it is, I can't even always put my finger on it all the time, but it's me actually altering my life and my way I go about doing things to keep myself from putting myself in a situation that might trigger some of these feelings that I get, some of these anxieties. You know, and it's so much more than that.
So is it a form of an anxiety attack, or is it a...
Sometimes it's an anxiety attack.
also seems like it's almost like a form of OCD in its own way, too.
Very, very much so. So, you know, you kind of develop routines and patterns because, you know, I do it this way, I know I'm safe. I do it this way, I know I'm good. I'm not going to trigger the issue. So you kind of set that OCD pattern in place.
So in the military, from your experiences, did you have any set routines that you had in the sense of trying to say, if I did it this way, I know I'll be safe? Or,
Absolutely.
Or if I wear this shirt every time, I know I'm going to be safe, type of thing?
You know, it was a lucky ball cap. It was I had a shemagh, I still have it hanging up in my living room, that no matter what, every time I went on patrol, I had that with me. It was, you know,
And some
every time I drove, I had a certain position I would set in the truck. Did it really make me react quicker? I don't know, but to me it did. You know, every time one of the hardest things I had to fight coming back here was every time I crossed under an overpass. I went on one side, I exited on the other. So the little overpass, and it was a counter IED technique. If you went under the overpass on the right side, by the time you got to the other side of the overpass, you're on the left side. So nobody could time you and get you set coming out of something like that. Driving in the middle of the road, ask anybody that rides with me even to today, if nobody else is on the roadway, I drift over and I kind of set in the middle of it, because that gets you as far away from each side of the road as possible in case there's a roadside bomb. So that's kind of, you know, looking back at that now, that was a safety thing in my head back then. Now I do it kind of because it's a comfortable thing for me to go back to now.
Well, it sounds like as you're a kid and as you're a parent yourself, developing those habits as a kid, you learn what's safe, what's not safe.
Absolutely.
Your parents tell you, don't touch the coffee pot. You eventually learn that it's hot.
Right.
And so you develop the routines as a kid.
Yeah.
But from what you're saying is that you ended up in the military from your experiences of all the traumatic things that you dealt with and had to deal with in order to get yourself through it. You had fail-safes that you had to adhere to mentally.
Right.
And so you develop those just like a child develops their learning skills, even their language.
Absolutely, and I see the same thing in domestic violence victims in what I do now. You know, you have the wife that's overly OCD on cleaning the house, because for years it was everything had to be perfect, or, you know, whenever the husband came home, there'd be an issue. You know, little things like that. It's kind of interesting but disheartening at the same time to see the similarities in people going through stuff in the civilian world, and I can realize and equate it back to stuff in the military, and how that how those symptoms developed over time.
And you're talking about, I know you're talking about from your own experience as far as being in the military and, and the traumatic things that have happened to your life because of that. And thank you for your service. I mean, I know that that's a part of it. And but at the same time, as you're alluding to, is that there's a lot of people that are out there in the public that don't have the military background, but they've actually experienced the same traumatic things that have happened to them in their life. It could be, as you had said, an accident. Could be domestic violence. Could be something, an incident that they experienced or seen, a violent situation.
Yep.
That just breaks their mental frame mind. I almost, when I think about it, and I've thought about before, it's almost like the movie Matrix.
Yeah.
Take the red or the blue pill,
Yeah.
And when you wake up, you actually see what the whole thing's
Right.
all about.
And, like good examples of are, if anybody's been at a home burglary, someone break into your house, it's a very traumatic experience.
Because we're
Right.
so used to that safety, that security,
That safety.
just like the church
And-
here. We're
And
used
all
to
of a
this-
sudden, something, I think it's one of the most horrible crimes that can happen to somebody, other than certain violent crimes. Someone violating your personal space like that. And so you have somebody, someone breaks in your house while you're home, you kind of start looking for ways to find that comfort back, right? To find that sense of security. And so maybe it starts off with, okay, now every night I have to walk around and I have to double check all the locks. And then I lay down. I got to get up, I got to double check all the locks again. Same thing happened to me whenever I first got out of the military. I would lay down in bed, and I'm not in the military anymore. I'm not at war. Lay down, my family's all laid down at night. I hear something that wakes me up at night. Well, before I can go back to sleep, I have to clear the entire house, go outside of my house, clear the entire property, all the outbuildings on the property. Then I had to come back inside. Then it's the thought, what if somebody came in while I was outside? Now I've got to clear the entire inside again. And if I don't, I will just lay awake all night, staring at the ceiling, hearing every little creak of the house, letting my mind run off with it. It's kind of, finding those little ways to make us find that safety feeling again.
And there are little nuances in the sense that a good example would be a child having to deal with abuse as a kid, and then the parents divorcing.
Yep.
And that child eventually develops their own pattern of PTSD, and yet they're off to school and they're bullied.
Yeah.
Because they don't know how to deal with it.
Because they're not like everyone else. They don't know how to deal with it.
And or even an individual that was sexually abused from a teacher or other things.
Yep.
Or neighbor.
Yeah.
You're right in the sense that you have that safety that we're all used to. And that mainstream of what we think is normal, and that we're almost like you're breathing, and all of a sudden someone just stops you from breathing.
And that's why I think it's super important to get rid of the stigma of getting help with mental health issues for adults, for children, for everyone. Because it's one of those things that, all of those years in the military and then afterwards, it destroyed every relationship I ever had with anybody. Because I didn't have healthy coping mechanisms. I didn't, sit down and see what was really bothering me. And the same thing happens to everyone else. We take childhood traumas, young adult traumas, and we take them into the relationships we have, and end up tearing relationships apart or causing issues in relationships. And so, tell me anything, get the help. There's nothing wrong with it. Matter of fact, I think it shows a lot of bravery and strength to stick your hand up and go, hey, I need a little help figuring this out.
And I think you're right, because a good example is, which hopefully more schools will have it, Boot Hill Counseling's over at the school.
Mm-hmm.
Because one of the big things is, I don't care your political views, I don't care who you blame, don't blame, or anything like that, but point blank, during COVID, it affected everyone in the world,
Yeah.
especially the kids. And it's basically set them back of how to deal with these issues. Their safeguardedness of going to school and having a place to go to see their friends, and having a place to go to that they know that's mainstream. But when it was abrupted, it was a traumatic experience for the kids.
Absolutely. And we're seeing some issues now with kids that, it did affect them. It did. It's going to be stuff that we deal with for the next 10, 15 years in society.
And it might be, who knows? There might be something else down the line that would cause
Yeah.
something even more serious. I mean, it's things that we need to be prepared instead of just having blinders on too,
Right.
and be ready for.
Absolutely. And our kids go through so much right now in our schools. I mean, I think it's awful, but necessary that we have to do active shooter drills in schools. I think it's a necessity, unfortunately, but I find it horrible that we have to put our kids through that trauma, because it is a type of trauma that they have to go through. They have to sit there and think about, I'm having to do this because this is a possibility. You know, and then
Well, and
even from whenever I was a kid and now, social media and everything else is so different and so much a huge part of their life, that there's traumas that are occurring there that I would have no idea how to understand.
and it's always been a rule of thumb for me, being in the educational field, is that one thing, and I know that right now it's a big issue, especially in Kelly School, is that you, as a teacher, you do not do anything sexually toward the students because it actually affects them for the rest of your
For
lives.
the rest of their lives.
And you don't really realize how impact a teacher has on a child's life.
Yeah.
No, doesn't matter what age they are. And even if it's in college, a
The-
teacher has an impact on the child
Absolutely.
and a student. And I myself, growing up, I mean, I was sexually harassed by a teacher too, but nothing happened, but I seen the cause and effects of what they did to other students.
Absolutely.
And it's like, oh my gosh.
You know, and that's something that we'll call it what they are, these active violence against kids. They affect these young
Minds.
young minds for the rest of their lives. For the rest of their lives, that is going to have some type of impact on them. Hopefully, they get, counseling, some good help, and it ends up being something that they can grow from. But there's always going to be that scar left on them. Same thing with, acts of violence that take place in the home. No parent's perfect. I mean, I mess up plenty with my children, but these acts of violence, they leave
A scar.
they leave a massive scar that,
And the hard thing is, as you're alluding to too, is that from children that have actually dealt with all these issues, whether it's domestic, whether it's outside the realm, it's hard, because if they don't get the help, they become what they were
Yeah.
victim from.
right.
And
Not
so,
always, but a much higher chance of it.
so they might
know.
do it to themselves. Suicide rates are very high right now for as young youth. They might decide to do it upon others, as far as their angst, their hurt. They don't have a way to release it or how to deal with it, so
Well, I mean, how many times do we kind of forget about the mental health of children because of like, you're a kid, Mom, you're my kid, I got you, Dad's got you. It's fine. And they don't really get to address the way they feel about things, the way things are affecting them, because we just tell them, grow up. Well,
and it's sort of hidden, because point blank, a lot of the kids are actually, when they're ignored from the parents or from the adults, is that they're actually go online. They'll actually start searching things that they shouldn't,
absolutely.
and they get more deeper into that mind frame without figuring out how to get a life jacket to save them.
Right, because their brains aren't developed all the way. They don't have all the coping mechanisms yet. And so
They
it's
do.
Yeah, right. But that's one of the things that always breaks my heart, and is a very much a pet peeve against my crimes against children. That could be a whole nother. It could be a whole nother day.
It can be, but yet point blank, these are cause effects of PTSD.
Yeah, absolutely.
And at an early age, to military, to domestic violence, whether
And
it's
that-
male
and
or
that turns into-
female,
And that turns into multi-generational real quick.
it does.
That person has something that happened to them. They never handled it correctly. They're children come up, their children are affected. As I said, you know, my PTSD affected my kids. Now I was, you know, never violent towards my kids, but they knew, you know, that they knew dad was having problems with stuff, and that affected them in some way.
You might as well say, and I'm sorry to say, because more and more we do these forums, everything, and I keep on saying this, everything revolves around everything.
Yeah.
And a good example would be whether it's drugs, whether it's alcohol, if mom and dad are actually dealing with that and you're actually growing up and you see that and you're victims from that whole situation, it's a form of PTSD that you're actually having to deal with. So what
Absolutely.
do? You go through the same routine to actually deal with it.
Yep.
And as you had said, it goes generational because you're not facing the fact of what's going on.
You know, and you think about that, something simple, not understanding how much of an impact it has. You know, let's look at a domestic violence situation. A child sees mom and dad have a domestic violence situation. That affects that kid. Let's say that kid does his best to break the cycle, or her best to break the cycle. And they're never violent towards their partner, but they're going to have something that's affecting them. You know, the way they, you know, either they talk about it or they deal with things, something like that, and that is going to have an effect on their kids. Maybe it's a smaller one.
It might be communicational skills.
Right.
It might be just
And-
certain nuances.
And so you're talking about an act of violence that took place here, and it may have a ripple effect for generations, 2-3 generations of later before that the effect of that one act of violence goes away. And it's, you know, it's getting into a whole other subject, but, you know, not addressing these situations and allowing them to fester has a more of an impact. And that was the big thing. Like, you know, I said it's something that it's my problem to fix. I had to fix it, because if I didn't, I'm hurting more than just me. It's not just me sitting there suffering. By me sitting there suffering, I'm hurting everybody else around me. I'm hurting my kids. I'll hurt my grandkids, maybe my great-grandchildren, for me not getting help finally stops having an effect.
It's almost like stop being selfish.
Right, exactly. Like, yep, something horrible happened. It's bad. It stinks.
And as you had said, is basically addressing the issue, getting the help. And again, I applaud Boot Hill Counseling for having the ability to have something like that at the school, because right now kids need it more than ever, not just because of the COVID, but also because online activity, things that parents don't know about. And that brings up the other thing is, I mean, you're talking about violence and things that actually traumatic experiences. We grew up, and I mean, one of the big things is that they were going after music, and now we're going after video games. But yet, a lot of the stuff that are actually out there, even movies. I remember horror movies as a kid that were pretty awful, but we enjoyed it, and kids enjoy the violence. But the problem is that if they actually see the violence, it's a totally different thing.
Very much so. That's kind of an odd thing. So there's a study they did with soldiers. One of the treatments they did, so some of the video games that are out, the combat video games, they actually found that for soldiers suffering from PTSD, playing the video games was actually a form of treatment. It actually helped them process things. It helped them kind of burn off some of that stress that they had. And, you know, don't get me wrong, there's still other counseling that has to take place, but that was that, you know, whenever life was just getting a little too hard that day, it was a good way for them to, you know, it releases the same endorphins and everything that actual combat released, things like that. So it helped them kind of wean off of that, because that's something else that, you know, if PTSD is caused from, you know, there's the prolonged exposure that causes PTSD. And then there's some, it can be caused from a sudden event as well. But those prolonged exposures, like for law enforcement, for firefighters, for your medical staff, for things like that, you know, it's over a long period of time this builds up. You get almost addicted to the endorphins that you get from being in those high stress situations constantly. So not only are you dealing with the processing the horrible stuff that you saw, you're also kind of going in withdrawals because I don't have that fix of endorphins that I'm used to getting. You know, that's when, you know, some of the signs is, you know, people getting into risky life behaviors, things like that, or turning to drugs to try to replace that fix that they had in life.
And you're right in the sense that a lot of times when your endorphins and when you're so used to a high stress situation or environment that you're trying to deal with and you're used to, and having to take a step back and not having that environment, I'm sure it's hard to actually deal with the day-to-day life.
Yep.
And knowing how to cope with the day-to-day life, because you don't have that high level of thought pattern going on
Right.
in your mind and that routine.
And that's, you know, so when you talk to soldiers, you ask them if they miss it. Almost every one of them's gonna say yes. Like, yeah, they miss it. In the reality, the work's horrible. War is a horrible thing. They don't know what exactly it is. You know, we'll say brotherhood. We definitely miss the brotherhood. There's something else there. And it's that living life at that, you know, that high-risk life, the endorphins going all the time and everything else. It makes it hard to let go of that, you know.
Well, and it goes back to that selfishness in the sense that you almost don't know who you are yourself.
Yeah, exactly. If you run, that becomes a huge part of your identity, and realizing that's not who I am. It's just something I did at a point in my life. It doesn't.
Becomes like a drug itself.
Yeah, exactly.
So, on another side, I mean, there's treatment as far as talking to counselors, talking to people, facing the scenario as much as possible.
Yep.
Sort of dealing with the routine of your OCD issues that you just talked about. I know that some people take comfort as far as a caregiving dog or a pet or things like that. How is that playing into the whole?
So I know a lot of people get a lot of comfort from the ESAs, emotional support animals, or in some cases actually service animals. I think it kind of gives them something to care for and take care of and put love into, something else to focus on. You know, there's tons of different programs out there, and the fear is, you know, people turn to trying to medicate the issue away. I think it gets back to that unhealthy coping mechanism, which the military is amazing at. You know, treat problem with large amounts of caffeine and alcohol to make the problem go away, which just turns into, doesn't address the problem. It just gives it time to grow, get uglier, and harder to deal with down the road.
Or antidepressant
Right.
medicine.
Exactly. You know, the military is real good about giving out stuff like that and pain pills and everything else, and then taking it all away all at once. And
And
didn't know why the guy self-imploded like that.
And then tell them that they have a problem, they have to deal with it.
Right, exactly. You know, biggest thing I could tell people is get out in the community, talk with people, get involved. Like as I said, one of the biggest things that helps me more than anything is helping other people. It kind of helps me address my own demons at the same time. When I'm sitting there helping them talk through their problems, they kind of, they say I get my little aha moments. I'm like, oh yeah, that's exactly what I do. Yep, that's exactly what bothers me right there.
And you're, I mean, you're right, and I think, and a lot of people don't realize this, that it's not just kids, not just adults. Senior citizens have PTSD.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, just dealing with the day-to-day lives for a lot of senior citizens of losing family members or friends or things like that. And there's a lot of people going through the PTSD, as you're just bringing up, that isolate themselves and because they don't want to deal with anything. And it's almost like putting time at a standstill.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, goes back to, I don't want to be a burden to my friends and loved ones. I don't want them to have to deal with my issues. And like, you think about it, you do see it quite a bit in the older community because, you know, their health's waning. They're losing friends and family members. The depression's kicking in. And it, you know, they're finding their coping mechanisms and ways to deal with, find their safe space again, right? Whenever their whole world flipped upside down, you know, whenever you've been married or been with someone for the last 40 years of your life and all of a sudden you suddenly lost them. And you know, yeah, people come by and check on you for a few weeks, but then, you know, everybody else moves on and your life's still turned upside down. It's absolutely a traumatic experience. And it's real easy to, just as easy as it's easy to overlook our kids, it's real easy to overlook the elderly as well. The more vulnerable people in our communities.
And it's not an easy thing to fix. It's not an easy thing to deal with. It's not an easy thing to face.
Oh yeah, like I'll be the first to tell people I don't have the answers. I know we have to work on it. I still work on myself.
It's
every single day.
I think the old commercial as a kid growing up is the Woodsy the Owl. How many licks does it take to get something a lollipop?
Right.
The world may never know.
That's right.
So it's the same scenario. It just basically we don't know, but the best thing to do is communicate and to interact with people and face things.
And you know, I'm curious but scared at the same time to see. You know, we just stepped out of a 20-plus year war. You know, we had Vietnam vets that were greatly impacted. We still talk about this was 20 years worth of war and multiple generations of people that are going to be affected, and we still haven't seen what that leads to yet. You know, yes, we have the 22 veterans a day commit suicide. I think it's down to 20 now, but still way too many.
But that doesn't include all the drug overdoses, or domestic violent killings, or other things. It's just
the dying from driving. You know, as I said, you kind of participate in those high risk lifestyle, the driving too fast, the drugs, the alcohol, everything else that goes along with it. So truthfully, I don't know how many we actually lose. But
and I know that it must be hard in the sense that people look at you as an officer in the community and as an individual that is a good person to communicate, but they don't see that other side of you in the sense that unlike some other people that are close to you that know that you go through your routines and that you have your moments and stuff, and that it's more or less that they take things for granted in the sense that they know that you're going to go through these,
Right.
but at the same time, the people out in the public
Yeah, they
don't
don't see
know
what
anything.
happens. Don't see what happens behind the big curtain in the corner, right?
And I think that's a lot with a lot of people with PTSD, that you have that facade,
Right.
but they don't.
You gotta put the smiley face on,
Yeah.
you know? Can't let them see you hurt.
And I think that's the other thing is as we're talking about all these things that culminate dealing with PTSD and the effects of it and the people that are affected, it's hard to, just like a lot of mental illnesses, it's hard to define things, and it's hard to actually embrace it by saying, hey, it's right here, especially since it's mental.
Oh,
And
yeah.
it's invisible almost. And
Yeah.
it's nothing. How do you, in the state government or the federal government, how do you quantify that?
Yeah, so it's almost easier to look at some of the physical scars I have on my body and accept, like, oh, okay, yep, that's what caused that. It's that one that you can't see, and I can't really put my finger on. And I can't tell how bad it is.
And unfortunately, most federal and state level funding, when it's cut, the mental health is actually cut the first thing, because people don't know how to quantify that.
You know,
And it's easier for them to actually say, oh, we can just cut that because we don't see it.
right. So
It
it's not
doesn't
here.
affect us,
Right.
so let's just cut it. So I think,
That's the number one sin of our nation, is the sin of indifference. You know, it's been something that's been a thing. If it's not in my face, if it's not right here, I can look the other way, it doesn't exist. And that indifference, it goes into a lot of things. You know, even as a police officer, you kind of hit on the mental health thing. I hate to say it, our prisons and jails are full of people that need treatment. You know, they need mental health treatment. And it's just, people come and ask me all the time, like, oh, what do I do to help my relative? I'm like, I don't know. I don't know, because they're like, well, can't you arrest them? I'm like, no, and excuse the way I put this, but you know, it's not illegal to be crazy. You know, as long as they're not hurting themselves or someone else, I can't do anything about it. And it's sad because I know what that path leads them to. And I want to help them. I literally don't have the
resources.
resources to do it. Like
And you're right, in the sense that I know there's a lot of states that have the funds for education, mental health in the prisons.
Mhm.
I know Missouri's not really one of them.
Yeah.
And it's hard to quantify a dollar amount to give to individuals that have committed crimes into the state, and how do they think of it as rewarding those individuals instead of trying to fix the situation.
Right.
Again, you can't quantify something you don't know, called mental health.
Right.
But in the long run, the cause and effect,
Is massive.
it is.
And it's heartbreaking. Just everybody knows, as a law enforcement, we all talk about it. It's heartbreaking because we know that some of these people, the last thing they need is to go sit in a jail cell somewhere. You know, they need help, but that
And-
option's just not available.
It's great that churches go to the prisons, try to help things out.
Absolutely.
But I know that a lot of the churches and the clergy aren't adapt to deal with the mental health. They're
Yeah.
more or less deal with the spiritual.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, that's not the mechanism for mental health. In some state legislation, individuals think that that's the mental health.
Yeah, and you know, I'll tell you now, in a prison, if they're not a danger to themselves or someone else in there, they kind of like, yep, okay, yep, you probably need to get that looked, you know, probably need to get that looked at, but not today, so.
When I was in Arizona, I actually worked for about a year with the federal government as a teacher. I went into the male and female prisons, and it was a very eye-opening experience, but at the same time, you can also see the eagerness in some of them wanting to learn something.
Yeah. Well, you know, we're talking about PTSD, that's a whole nother source that we, really easy to overlook. But, you know, people that get put in the criminal justice system, they go through something very traumatizing. You know, their family goes through something very traumatizing. Like I was talking to a young guy that, you know, I finally kind of fostered a friendship with him. You know, he doesn't talk to cops, you know. And as I'm talking to him, we get more out of him, it's because whenever he was a kid, his parents were doing something, cops kicked his door in, big mean guys in blue uniforms, mean to everybody. And that's something that happened to him as a child that, you know, he's a almost 40-year-old man, and it still affects him today. And, you know, no difference in, you know, people that, you know, people make mistakes. I make mistakes, you make mistakes. But they made a mistake at some point in their life that got them put into the, you know, criminal justice system. And they went through a horribly traumatic experience. You know, getting your freedom taken away is a horrible thing. Then anything that happened while they were in there, and then they get thrown back out into society. There's a whole nother, and again, it's real easy to blow them off like, well, they did it themselves. Shouldn't have done something to get arrested by. Well, you know, that doesn't really help fix the problem, because, you know, how many of them end up going back into the same cycle because, you know, they don't get that help. You know, we've all heard of, you know, the criminal that as soon as he gets out does something to get put back in because he can't function out here. This is a foreign place and he's uncomfortable with it and he's got PTSD.
Yeah.
But there's just no help for him. You know, there's no one there that can teach him those coping mechanisms and let him know it is going to be okay, and allow him to find that new even ground. You know, it's kind of odd, as I say, I love helping people and getting out and talking to people. It's really odd as a former military guy and police officer finding common ground with, you know, a career convict that's been in multiple times and probably spent as much time behind bars as I spent in the Middle East. But we actually find horrible experience is a horrible experience, and the effects on the brain and everything, that we have more in common than what we like to admit. You know.
And it is a thing in the brain. I mean,
Yep.
we get so used to a routine in our brain, and when we sort of cross the brain over into something that just shocks it, it sort of almost like clouds everything else.
Right. You know, and it'd be real easy. You know, people say like, "Oh, you know, just don't do that." Okay, well, don't blink. I mean, it's literally an ingrained part of us. And if it could be as simple as me just going up, like, you know what, I don't want to have PTSD today. I'm just not going to participate. That would be great, but unfortunately, it's not the way it works.
I don't know. I know in this area, as far as Scott City and Southeast Missouri, most people aren't used to living in a city.
Yeah.
And city life's totally different. And
Absolutely.
You're used to the violence. You're used to things around you, and used to, as you had said, it's almost like a military zone.
Yep.
There, you know what to do, what not to do.
Yep.
And it's an instinct that you actually deal with.
Yep.
So a good example is last week, I was working on a building that I have, and I looked over, and there was an individual with 3 dogs, and he was not all there. He was actually in the middle of the street, bowing down to the ground and everything, and making his prayers and talking to himself. So I knew there was something, and the dogs would just about ready to get hit by a car and stuff like that. So I called for some help, and they actually went to go find him, and they found him, and the dog's still about ready to get run over. And but you're right, there's nothing that can be done.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just a routine check, see if they're okay, you're not putting any harm to anyone, but at the same time, it's one of those stops of saying, okay, what's going on here? Is there anything we can do? There's no support we can give you, so.
And it's heartbreaking because, trust me, we all sit back and we're saying, unfortunately, it's going to get to the point to where he victimizes somebody else.
Yeah.
Or he hurts himself.
Before anything can be done.
Yeah, before I can do anything about it. And none of us want that to be the answer. And I'm pretty sure I know the gentleman you were talking about. Dealt with him several times. Nice guy when he's in the right place. Just, he doesn't always stay there.
It's understandable. And for most people, when they see something like that, it's a traumatic experience just to see it, especially in this area.
Yeah, because it's, we're in a lovely small town America. Do we have our problems? Absolutely, but for the most part, it's a peaceful area, so seeing something like that it's outside the norm,
And how do we deal with that as a community, as far as the issue of PTSD and people that have it as a community?
I think everybody understanding it a little bit more, so whenever you see somebody that's having an issue, you can identify, the person's having an issue. But then also, like our churches and different things, having the outreaches, having the place where they can find the comfort zone where they can talk about what's bothering them, let them realize that they're not the only ones going through some of this stuff. That it's okay to talk about it. It's okay to get help for it. Because again, a lot of these people want help. Like whenever I got out of the military, I wanted help. But everybody talks about how easy it is. Like, oh yeah, if you're a vet, call this number. Unless you're trying to kill yourself, they don't care. It took a long time for me to find somewhere I could just go talk to.
And isn't that also part of the problem in the sense that everyone's so used to their own routine, but when someone has PTSD that's around them that they somewhat know about, it almost is draining for them, that they don't want to deal with it?
Absolutely, yeah. So
and help
like,
that really help that person because they got their own life and they don't want to be sucked into that.
That's right. It's that indifference.
It's
it's that sin that we have. I don't like, man. Just get your stuff together. All right. We're tired of dealing with it. Just get your stuff together. It's real easy to say because you just don't want to deal with it. You don't want to realize it. They're having a moment. They're having a hard time. And I understand. Well, we all have. I've got 4 children. I've got a job that takes way more than 40 hours a week to do, plus everything else I have going on. It's draining. Last thing I want to do whenever I do come home is, deal with somebody else's issues. Like, man, I've got my own mental health issues. How am I going to deal with yours?
Well, if I can interject something, because one of the ministries I wanted to start here, this was when I first got here and tried to launch it, was just Coffee with a Vet. Because there's no, not everybody wants to go to the hospital, and it didn't matter. It was all across the line, male and female, just come just to share stories, to be able to do that. That was one of the reasons why the gathering room, when you look at that room in there, was like, maybe they want to come down here, but then the church may be a threat. So still trying to find that common place where veterans can meet and we can have that place. Because there's so many around here. And one of the first things I was telling Jason was we need to create something so they just, and they can come out. It could be 1. I don't care if it's 1. It could be 20. Just come out, guys. It's not going to be a big forum. Just come out and have a conversation.
Yeah. I mean, that was one of the things that me and some of the other vets there talked. Like, we don't have a VFW here. So we don't have that, VFW has the bad stigma of it. It's like, you just go there and sit at the bar and drink and smoke cigarettes. But it's that camaraderie of guys that you can sit and talk to and feel comfortable talking to.
Because nobody understands it
Yeah.
outside of that community. And that's why I was telling, even in clergy, in the churches, when I look at it, I'm not a trained psychologist or psychiatrist, so we've got to bridge people that have this to the right people, like some of the speakers we've had in here.
Right.
But a lot of times, the clergy just wants to take it over, or they become experts, and they're not. So it's like, let's get them to the right place, let's figure out, but how do you create that place where they just want to have a conversation, they just want to hang out with some, in fact, I always tell Jason, now I've been in ministry 20 years, the camaraderie of my Marine Corps life has never, nothing can replace that. And we often say, I miss that, because that's something it just can't be replaced, and it can't be repeated unless you've experienced putting that uniform on every day and understand what it's like for your brothers and be able to do that. So,
And it's one of those things you'll hunt for the rest of your life.
That's
trying
right.
to fill that gap, and it's never going to happen.
And that's sort of like this situation like we started with the senior citizens, in the sense that even though that we do bingo and lunch and learn with them, hopefully there's time for them to actually interact and talk with each other, to have that a little bit.
Yeah.
But they're just so used to routines,
Yep.
as we talked about. It's hard to break that mode so that they're actually open up.
Yeah.
And it takes a lot of doing.
It was one of the things so going through the police academy, it was one of the things, all the stuff I did, special operations stuff, you don't talk about it. Unless you're around other vets, you don't talk about it, right? Because you're not going to understand anyway. You can't connect with that. Like but whenever I went to the police academy, I was like, you know what, here's an opportunity. Because unfortunately, I learned a lot from my experiences in the military. It was a good opportunity to try to share some of that with a group of people that maybe could learn from it. And I opened up more in the police academy than I had opened up since I got out of the military. And it was, I can definitely say I got more out of that than the poor kids that got stuck listening to me all day long in the academy did.
What's so strange, though, you think about is, one day you're here, and the next day you're sitting in McDonald's with a Big Mac.
Yeah.
And two very different worlds, and they're miles apart, and you're sitting next to people that have no idea what you just came back from and live that life. And I think just people around just don't understand. There's still, when I go to the VA, I look at all these young guys, especially when I was in Phoenix, the amount of men and women in there that had no limbs, they were missing. And I'd watch them sitting in the hallways, and it was just heartbreaking thinking about these guys and these women need attention now. And there was like 80,000 vets just in Phoenix, and let alone over here. This clinic's really good. I avoided it like the plague until I finally went here. And they really do treat you good here. It's like you walk in, you don't walk around anywhere. So I know that it's an ongoing developing, so hopefully they're gonna have something for the PTSD, so that people, we can recommend people just take them over that have this, especially with the vets. Yeah.
And you're right, even if you go into Dollar General or Casey's or Rhodes, I mean, you don't know if you're standing next to in line with someone that might have been domestic violence and they have their own issues or other things, and they're just so sunk within that they're not wanting to deal with things around them. But off of that, I know that we don't have much time, but is there any questions that people in the audience might have? And if you actually hear the questions, if you can repeat it, since they don't have a mic, and answer them.
Well, I have the mic, so I can bring it around if anybody's got a question. So the people online can actually hear what you're gonna ask. Anybody?
So I can relate to a lot of what you guys are talking about, just because, I had the abusive situation and stuff as a child. So coming from that, and suicide was a thing that I had to deal with, and the healing, if you don't deal with it, it took me almost 30 years to deal with it, because as a kid, you might not know how to verbally express what's going on, because you have a kid mind, you kind of grow up fast in some ways as an adult, but you're still a kid, and there's a disconnect. And you know, with what you guys were talking about with, you know, like you're not getting the development that you need in certain areas, it is a problem.
Yeah.
And not having, I mean, there's more awareness of mental stuff going on, but just, I think just the effect of that, you know, and how you know, you're saying, well, you know, unless something happens, there's nothing that can be done. It's almost like there's a demoralization. I mean, would you feel that kind of happens? And I mean, no two triggers for me might be the same for you. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, I've worked with adults with disabilities that might have had trauma and they can't verbalize it. You know, something as simple as a smell, a color, a sound, can set somebody off. And what can we do to maybe raise awareness that we can recognize and maybe potentially help talk somebody down if they just need to talk to somebody, or we can potentially talk to them?
It's a loaded question.
Yeah, that's a lot to it. First off, you said it took you 30 years to process. Congratulations, finally taking it. Good on you. I mean, because I know it's not easy. And good job finally addressing that issue. As far as what we can do for other people and help them, it's so hard. Because, you know, I know me as a vet, like if I'm having a bad moment, not that I'd want to snap, but I'd be like, how would you understand what I'm going through? You know, that, because we get into those dark places, we get a little snippy, we can get kind of rude. And so it's, I think the biggest part is letting them know that you are there and you are willing to listen. Don't force it. Just be like, hey, you know, if you need someone to talk to, I'm here.
I think that's the biggest question, in the sense that out of a lot of the issues that we address and deal with over the year, is that there's no easy way to answer how to fix things.
Yeah.
And the only easiest way to actually address it is address it and talk about it and be familiarized with it. A good example is when you travel around the world and you do things. A good example, Australia. I dealt with the Aboriginals. You go from one community to another community with some Aboriginals. They don't know each other, but the way that they get to know each other is that, what family are you from? Who's your family? So they actually understand the background of the individual. It's not just the names or anything, it's just more or less the emotional things of what they've been through, their experiences their families have been through. So they know, they start to feel for that, and then they can actually reflect upon that and build from that new beginning. And I think that's what it's about. It's basically communicating and sharing. And if you don't have that, you isolate yourself and you're not educating.
Well, I think that goes back to, excuse me, we're wired for community. So social media comes in and it separates everybody. And it's that disassociation, the guy in the street, the woman who looks like she's nuts, we're just not going to worry about her. Realizing that even with now social media, our kids, even at the young age, I think that's why, you know, educate, re-educate. Get these kids to learn now, because even when I was growing up, I can remember it was always the kids with, you know, had mental illness. They were always separate. They rode in the little bus. They were made fun of. My sister was one of them.
They were in the other classroom.
Yeah, that's right. You know, down the hall, we have to worry about it. So our kids grow up. Our own culture teaches them we're different. They're different, and we're better just by whether it's a drawing on a wall. So it really goes back to that early years of how are we going to change a culture, a generation. We're going to have to teach a new generation so that generation changes.
But Bob,
but it's the teachers. And how do you get to a school? And when we sit here, we know the school's so busy, the curriculum, we've sat in meetings and you brought stuff up, and they'll sit and they'll say, yeah, but we got so much on our plate. But still, there's certain things that are still never going to be. And when I was in Georgia, we were trying to bring in suicide and domestic violence based on what you spoke about last time. Mm-hmm. The school wouldn't even, wouldn't even allow it, because they said it's a liability. Because if you bring in and start talking about suicide, the potential of a student hurting themselves, they'll say it was because that was planted by the speaker who came in. So schools, some of the schools won't even allow you to talk about this stuff.
There is, I mean, it's almost like another forum in the sense that a lot of people don't realize back in the 80s, Reaganomics, they actually developed the educational plan in California with McDonald's in mind. They wanted to actually have a system set up. And a lot of the government in the states ended up having to quantify things. And the problem with social media, that sort of reinforces that quantification, basically selective quantification, and put them in a system.
Yep.
So once we get so set up into almost like a McDonald's or Walmart shelf, that it's hard to break from that, to actually be humans and to communicate and to deal with these issues that we're talking about, because it's so structured and it's almost like a brick building. All those bricks are compiled so that it's hard to break through those bricks and to have a conversation like we're having.
One of the biggest pieces of advice I could give you, if the opportunity arises where you are able to, they give you the opportunity to sit down and talk with them, be vulnerable. Okay, so like me and you have PTSD caused by very different things. But if I sit here and go, like, I know where you're coming from, like, have you ever had the moment where, like, you know, the anxiety hits you so bad that you don't even want to get out of bed in the morning? So you connected with that. You knew where I was coming from. Right, right. But you could feel that. You could be like, okay, yeah, hey, we got something in common here. And then if I share with you, what do you automatically want to do? You want to share back with me, right? And we can start opening up that dialogue. So again, if you really want to, you know, you ask how to really help somebody, if the opportunity arises, don't be scared to be vulnerable with them. You know, let them know that, hey, I may not understand, but I understand. Like, you know, I get it. I may not understand exactly the details in behind yours, but I understand the feeling. You know, the hopelessness. You know, like I love spending time with friends and family. Love it. But at the same time, sometimes the day of, that anxiety hits me so bad, I can't get out to go do it. As much as I want to, I physically can't. And it breaks my heart that I'm not going to do it. You know? You gotta psych yourself up in here first. Right. You know? But see, then that gives you something, we understand it. Like, we know exactly what each other's talking about. Yep.
Share, communicate, and educate.
Yeah.
So I know we're a little over time, so thank you very much, everyone, for your time and energy and your sharing of knowledge and information, and hopefully we can help direct things in the right direction for each other.
Thanks everybody for letting me come up and talk. I appreciate it.